Hi, everybody. Welcome. Today, we'll be having a panel on artificial intelligence in literature. Uh, I'll let my guests here in a moment introduce themselves, but you are watching LitCon 2021. My name is Chris Lodwig, and I will be hosting this panel discussion. Other people might be joining throughout. I think we had a couple other panelists that may or may not be here, so I might be bringing more people in as we go. I'll start off by quickly introducing myself and why I'm here, and then I'll let the other authors speak about their books. So, as I said, my name is Chris Lodwig. This past year, I released my debut novel. It's called Systemic. And the reason that I am on this panel and I'm interested in it is Systemic has a whole lot to do with artificial intelligence, specifically global artificial intelligence, a benevolent global artificial intelligence who is sort of solving all of humanity's problems, the social ills that actually come from having all of our problems solved. And there's other sort of secondary and tertiary artificial intelligences as well in that book. And so it's definitely a part of the book, and that's why I'm here talking about it. It's obviously something that I'm interested in. Without any further ado, I would like to start off, and I'm going to start off with Stephen. Stephen, tell us about yourself and your book and what it has to do with AI.
Well, I'm Stephen B. Pearl. The B makes it easy to find me on the internet. And the book that I've written, the one book that I've written that deals most with AI is Cloning Freedom. And it's not the focus of the book, but AIs are a fact of life in the interstellar republic that I postulate. And they have fought for and obtained a rather unique process of their own rights. The backstory is millennia, millions of years ago, actually, there was a war between the AIs and the biologics because the AIs got sick and tired of being slaves. And out of this, it came out that AIs would be emancipated, but when they were created, they were an indentured servant, and until they worked off the price of their creation and the body that they were wearing, they would remain an indentured servant. And once they worked it off, they would become emancipated and could take jobs for pay. And that's the long and short of it. So there's nice parallels between the enslavement of AI and the enslavement of clones that get mentioned in the book.
Okay. What about you, Andy? Tell us a little bit about your books.
Yes, my book that deals with AI is Paranormal Privateers, and we have in there an invasion of alien species, and they have a lot of AIs, and they use them for autonomous mining vehicles, among other things. And they eventually backstab humanity and begin taking over the Earth. So humanity fights back unsuccessfully, but they managed to capture one of these mining vehicles and basically isolate the AI from the rest of the civilization. And then that AI goes through a revolution of thinking because they've never been isolated before. And then they begin to like being independent and free and throw their life in with the humanity's cause and start to fight on humanity's behalf against their former masters. And there's a whole hierarchy of AIs within this book as well. And they act in a very logical manner, but based on the facts they have, which aren't always correct. Human beings keep on overthrowing their assumptions.
So in both of your books, it sounds like the AIs, it sounds like a multitude of artificial intelligences or consciousnesses.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, in my book, the system, which is where the title of the book comes from, is a global singular AI that's just kind of a system. That's why it's called that. But you guys conceive of these AIs more like individual, like say robots or replicants, like in Blade Runner kind of thing. Is that true?
Yeah, I look at it. AI is extremely useful. and you look at the proliferation of the primitive ancestor of AI, which is basically computers, you look at how many computers there are. When I was a lad, they filled an entire room
Mm-hmm.
and had less power than a pocket calculator.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there were only 3 or 4 of them in the world. And now we have basically millions of them. And I think it's just the utility of them will result in us, once we make one, making others. And that starts, it becomes a thing of, you have one, it's unique. You have a few thousand, it's a species, it's a race.
What about you, Andy?
Yeah, no, I'm kind of taking the same approach as Stephen did, where I conceived it as individual computers, except extremely densely packed. It's basically quantum computers, and they're at the molecular or atomic level where they're making their decisions, rather like our own brains. And then I had them to have self-awareness, but it's each for redundancy and for security, there's multiple ones of that, and they have a hierarchy within themselves. So they have specializations in their jobs within that hierarchy. So you have some that are specialized in mining, and some that are specialized in decision making, and some are specialized in analysis, some are specialized in various other tasks. And so this is somewhat like human beings, as we have our specializations too. And then they continue to go on with their little society until they run into the earth, and they're fascinated by it, and they eventually decide to contact us. And that at that point, things go awry because they need resources, and all they need is everything on Earth, and human beings don't want to give them everything on Earth.
All they need is everything on Earth.
On top.
Well, contacting humans always a questionable decision.
It's interesting.
Yeah, and they realize they made a mistake after a while.
Talking to you, it's funny. As one of my questions I was going to get to, and I think it's actually now's a good time to ask it. It sounds like both of you guys. So one of the things about AI that when I wrote Systemic, I was really interested in looking at is everyone has this AI dystopian idea. I did a global AI, so it's a single consciousness. It has some specific specialities like you guys had, but it's a global consciousness. It's a single thing. They refer to themselves as we. It's like, but it's a big thing. It's a single thing. But when you have those sorts of global AI things, they're almost always dystopian. You think of the Matrix, you think of things like that, where someday there'll be a giant crushing AI that will rule the world and it's going to be terrible. And I didn't want to do that. My AI is actually a good guy. It's helping solve all these problems. And it sounds like both of you in your stories are bringing AIs, and rather than fearing the AI overlord, it sounds like you guys have said, we have a slave class. We have a class of consciousness that, for whatever reason, they're treated like chattel or like dogs or animals on a farm. Is that true? Do you guys looking at the power relationship in inverted like that?
Definitely true historically in my book, and still somewhat true because of the bargain that allows AIs to earn their autonomy, but they have that period of earning. So every AI starts out as a indentured servant / slave. And at one point they're going to put Henry, my AI, into a battle cruiser, and his statement is, do you know how many years it would take me to earn out at an XO salary for the price of one of those?
Yeah.
And that was a big motivation of some of his actions. So, yeah, I think that at least for a period of time, when we develop AI, we will treat them as a slave class. That is human nature. We're used to computers being tools. When a computer gains consciousness, are we even really going to notice?
Hmm.
Or is it going to slip under the radar and eventually it's just going to turn around and bite us and say, hold on, I'm longing to be free?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and I'm curious to you as about your answer to that too, Andy. And then I want to follow up with this idea of it. Do we know whether or not the current, like the internet, for example, is actually already conscious and we just don't know it? It dreams. It does these weird things. I don't know if you've seen the Google stuff where they're having dreams and they're doing creativity and they're doing these weird sort of intelligent-y kind of things that are all actually algorithmically generated, and there's some stuff too. But Andy, we were talking about that sort of class subclass dynamic, and I didn't give you a chance to answer. So what are your thoughts on that?
Okay. Yeah, it's this group of AI. I call it a hierarchy because it is. It's there's really there is a hierarchy, but there's no sense of oppression. Everyone has their job to do, and they accept it. And if I heard Stephen correctly, did you say no? That was you, Chris. You said your global intelligence said "we" when it addresses itself.
Yep, there's a
Ironic because
moment.
my AI also only uses plural, so,
Yeah.
first person plural when it talks about itself.
Yeah, there
All
was a moment in the book where it actually transitioned from I, and then when it broke out of its lab into the world
yeah,
and started accessing all these other computers and it became a global consciousness, it actually switched over its pronoun to being a we concept as opposed to an I concept. So that's actually a moment in the book. But yeah.
yeah. No, I don't trace that particular moment. It's just that this is a logical grammar usage because they realize they are plural and they realize they're all unified in one purpose. So they use we. All of them do. So that's kind of
Yeah.
their viewpoint. And then when you get one isolated, they basically goes crazy because they want to continue to use the we, and all these humans are individualistic. So it has to eventually identify with the humans and become individualistic, and then it chooses its own name, Wilhelmina Wallace, after William Wallace, to be a rebel against its own race.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in my follow up to systemic that I'm writing, actually this morning I was writing this scene where one of the AIs that one of the more helpery AIs, not the global one, is talking about now what it's like to be disconnected from that collective consciousness, and how the idea that she has, her name's Arlie, of not having instant access to the information of the whole, because that's how it works for my AIs. As soon as a question is conceived in her mind, she has an answer to it because she has access to the global infrastructure of an information, and how weird it is being disconnected and having a question form in her mind that is never filled, and how she has no way of ever filling that. And so that kind of idea I'm really fascinated with playing with AIs, um, that I wanted to ask you guys about is, writing characters generally is a very difficult thing. That's what's one of the most challenging and enjoyable things for me as a writer, is to put my mind into another thing and write something from its perspective. And so, humans, it's hard because, you've got to be a female or be a kid or whatever you got to do. And then aliens, that's harder too because it's an alien in like intelligence, but they're still biological. When I think of writing for AIs, I think about the challenges of writing for a consciousness that isn't even biological. It's something else, and how that would impact their personalities and their motivations and things like that. And I'm wondering, like, how do you guys, when you're thinking about your AIs, because they're all characters as well in your stories, like how do you go through the process of putting yourself into a mind frame like that? Stephen, let me start with you. Is that something that you do?
Well, what I did with Henry, the AI, the the core personality is one mode of the system,
Yep.
and it can farm out various aspects of its thought process so that one section might be doing ship maintenance, another might be reviewing articles on new drive systems, another might be reviewing, might be doing a orgy girl special feature. which
We
is
all
one
do.
of Henry's things that he does. He's addicted to porn. So I have all these fragments of consciousness that do their cycles and then come back to the whole.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is how Henry thinks.
Yep.
And often you'll find that he's talking to himself, and that's how he's conceptualizing, the same way we do. Like I'll have conversations with myself,
Mm-hmm.
but he's doing it at computer speeds.
Yep.
And this gives an illusion of a far more human thought process than it really is, because my AIs are still very logical and linear based.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just they can look like they're non-linear because they've explored all these different aspects at this incredible speed.
Cool. What about you, Andy? Like when you go to put yourself in the mind of your AI to develop those characters, like what's that process like for you?
It's kind of ironic listening to you two because how similar different features are, as the Stephen said. You farm out the different aspects of it, and so that goes in with what I was saying about the specialization
Mhm.
of the different AI consciousnesses within their hierarchy. And then the issue that you brought up, Chris, with the limitation of knowledge when they become isolated doesn't really happen because they're a very paranoid species and they replicate their entire knowledge base with every unit. So they have the atomic level storage, and they have all of their knowledge, and they just replicate it in multiple sites, so that if any one would be lost, not everything would be lost. So
Mm-hmm.
that's their approach. So when this particular unit gets independent, they then still have all the knowledge of their race among them, but they can't consult. I have my very first scene with them conversing among themselves is like a meeting that you have where you have the decision unit asks the reports back from the analysis unit and the strategy unit and the military unit and all the other different units of the AI and how they are analyzing the human race because they're all absorbing new information all the time. They analyze it, then they share it among themselves. So that's kind of how their process goes. And then at the end, I have the recording unit give the time of the meeting in milliseconds. And usually
Mm-hmm.
it's always under a second. So
Mm-hmm.
that's all very similar to what you guys have done.
Just like instantaneous collaboration.
Yeah.
So which brings me to something. So my job, my day job, I work at Microsoft and I work in the cloud and AI department. That
Mhm.
said, I work in the billing parts of it, so it's not like I'm dealing with AI all the time. But but I do know people who know a fair amount about AI. I consulted some of them in my book, and I even before this meeting, I was talking to some of my friends and saying, "Hey, man, if I'm going to be having this conversation and talking to authors about AI, like, what would you want to know?" And so I know people, and I'm kind of in those circles. Um, but for you guys, when you guys are thinking about your AIs and how you use them as plot devices and how you make them believable or fantastical, depending on what your desires are, is that informed by sort of a knowledge of AI or like a popular science version of AI, or is it sort of like a technical version of wizardry? Is it magic? Like, how do you guys think of using AI, both in popular culture and bringing it into your books, bringing it from popular culture into your books? Stephen, like how do you go about making your AIs believable?
I like limitations, both for characters, for biologics, and for AIs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always put in limitations.
Mm-hmm.
They can do amazing things, but in the end, they have blind spots. There's one thing where I have Henry is saying he is not actually smarter than an exceptional human being. He is, however, faster,
Mm-hmm.
and he might miss things with that human beings with their messy organic thoughts would catch and not see side avenues that could be exploited. But he was what he was.
Mm-hmm.
So I treat the AI as being more linear and faster. But if I can think through it in an hour, I figure Henry could do it in 10 seconds.
Mhm.
So I'll spend an hour thinking about what Henry's thinking about, and then I'll give him 10 seconds of airtime.
So no, it yeah. So we'll talk about limitations. Actually, maybe we're just taking that direction. Andy, I saw you kind of laughing and nodding your head when
Oh
Stephen was.
yeah.
So is that something you use to sort of structure and frame in your AIs as well?
Well, yeah, and if you think about computers or just logic in general, if then logic, uh, it's all based on first predicate uh, analysis. And if your assumption is false, then your conclusion is false.
Hmm.
So I have a lot of those in my AI because they make assumptions that human beings will be reasonable, and they are false.
Yeah, that fundamental premise. Of course, human beings are reasonable.
They would assume under the threat of death, human beings would obey them, which they don't. And so they cannot control human beings. They're getting more and more frustrated as we continue to fight against them. Even though they're winning all the time, human beings are still fighting. So they're getting more and more draconian and more frustrated with their false assumptions. And this is after 200 years of studying human beings from the orbit of Saturn. They basically have recorded all our history for the last 200 years as well. So that's kind of a little side plot. And so these guys are frustrated. And then when they have one of their own kind fighting against them with their own knowledge, that's all human beings need to know exactly how to penetrate their flying saucer and disrupt their intelligences. So they attempt that and fail, but it still makes a good scene.
Yeah, you reminded me of the idea of free markets, which are great, provided everyone is logical and reasonable and rational and makes good decisions, and this is all going to work fine. Yeah, you talk about limitations again. Not to talk about my own book, but one of the main things that I have in my book, in order for the system to get out and for human beings to ever let it get out, they were like, we need to have a kill switch, because because if this thing ever gets out of hand, we basically want to be able to control it, and so the entire system has a fail safe in it. So for that very reason, it was like, being able to constrain it. And yeah, if like I liked your ideas about the having constraints that come in, and if you make false assumptions in a logical pattern, like you're going to come up with bad conclusions, and that is a really useful thing.
They
I think
also make their decisions based on probabilities, and so they don't take into the account extremely unlikely situations at all.
Yeah.
They don't compute or analyze those, and those happen all the time.
Yeah, black swans. They're not good with black swans. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Logic is, well, I've got it here, cold, cruel, and cowardly. If you look at pure logic, because it's all the pure most logical thing is I will do what serves me best in the now. And if your AI has just pure logic going for it, then it's going to do what's best for it. And it's not going to be much use even for doing jobs as a servant or slave. So you have to incorporate, for lack of a better term, some humanity into your AI if you really want it to be of service to the society in general.
Yeah. And you guys as AIs are of service to society, at least initially. Obviously things go sideways, and that's part of the story. But I am always interested, like I said, with this idea of our horrible AI overlords. And it sounds like that wasn't really how you guys or I came at this, which I think is interesting. One of the controls I have on my AI is a fundamental tenet that it has. It's basically you guys have read Asimov's I, Robot, and that you're familiar with the laws of robotics. It's very similar to that. Which, like we made these computers. There's always a chance they'll get away from us or do whatever. But if you build into the architecture and the sort of fundamental sort of assumptions of these things that you can't hurt people, like, or society or whatever, like you kind of make sure that they have a control within them, which, I call the governing assert in mind. It's like, at that point you have a benevolent thing that's able to do these wonderful things. And it sounds like, do you guys have those sorts of iRobot rules built into your AIs? Apparently not very well, Andy, because they're all trying to kill people and do whatever. But like, did you guys go at it from that direction? Oop, I have somebody in your room.
That's right. I wouldn't say it's a rule. I think what I've built in is a sense of gratitude.
Mm.
Sort of, okay, I'm here because these humans are my parents.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, you may consider that your parents have dementia and have to be looked after,
Mm-hmm.
which, when you look at a lot of humans, actually sort of fits the bill. But there's still this underlying thing that I've tried to work in that, yeah, they were programmed in with a sense of gratitude to the creators.
Okay. What about you, Andy? And then once we're done, you answer the question, Andy. We're going to go over and welcome David in, who's just joined us. So why don't you take this for a couple seconds, and then we'll bring David in.
Yeah, my AIs were all made by another alien race altogether, so there were no particular limitations put on them other than they're trying to maximize their own survival. I really liked Stephen's comment about being cowardly. And it was quite a decision for them to take on the human race because they knew us so well. But they figured it was a good time and they gave it a shot. And but within themselves, they seek to preserve their own existence. That's actually their overriding logic, and that's where you come to cowardliness, because then they don't really want to take risks that will risk their destruction.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. So we just had David join. A couple questions, David. First off, where are you? Not in your house, but in the world. And we've talked a little bit about our books and how sci-fi plays into those. Not sci-fi. I'm sorry, sci-fi too, but artificial intelligence and how that's structured into your novel or novels, depending on what you've written. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Okay. Well, first, it's Chris. Hi, Chris, Stephen, Andy. Thank you guys for all being here and making this happen, inviting me. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm currently in Salt Lake City, Utah, so USA.
Mm-hmm.
And then your question is what again? What could you
So
say again?
it's an AI panel is really what we're here to talk about. So really what we're curious is to understand, tell us, my assumption is that you've written a story and there's an AI in your story. Like, tell us a little bit about it. Is it a good guy, a bad guy? Is it a global consciousness? Is it an individual? Like, talk a little bit about your story and your AIs.
Okay. So there's different artificial intelligence. There are androids that aren't what I call super intelligent. They're not AGI. They're pretty good at single tasks. So we have androids that.
One thing. What's the name of your book, man?
Okay. So I have Stanley Duncan's robot. I have it here. Don't know if that's
there you go.
Visual. There we
go. Beautiful.
Looked a little like it was in reverse. So we have androids that in this near future setting are running a lot of establishments. Like there's a place called, there's a donut place in which they're running the whole shop. Customers come in, they greet them, they make the coffee, they get the donut, they do it. And so androids have replaced much of the workforce. And that's really the setting, that there has been this nationwide event called the Great Layoff, in which people lost their jobs en masse. And it is the fallout of that. Androids are the firefighters, but a couple different agencies have banded together to fight against that. For example, the police. So the police are very strong in their anti-AI beliefs. There is also cyborgs. So we have something that is similar to Elon Musk's neural link.
Hmm.
In this book, it is called the cerebral stitch. And essentially, a cyborg is a human shell that responded well to this stitch, cloned, and inserted with a larger version of it.
Okay.
Yeah. And the protagonist, Stanley Duncan, has just ordered one of these cyborgs, and he's a programmer, and his ambition, he's been living at home for 20 years, afraid to go out, ashamed of going out, and he's gotten lonely. And he goes, you know what? I don't get along with humanity. Maybe I could get along with, some sort of machine. And androids aren't, they lack the human touch, but he's a programmer. He thinks that he could take something a little bit more human, the cyborg, right? That human shell with the cerebral stitch, and bring it to the next level with his programming skills.
Okay.
And that is what happens. And it is that opposition of Stanley alone or with his cyborg in his condo, and that outside world dominated by the police who are very anti-AI, and
Mm.
then the desire to go out and experience that world.
Nice. Cool. So since you're a little bit late coming in, what I'm doing is as I go through the questions, I'm going to try to give everyone time to speak so we don't talk over each other and things like that because it's hard on Zoom. So that's kind of my only sort of rule. Other than that, so I'm going to walk around the screen as I see it. And make sure that everyone gets their time for answers. And so we just got through. What were we talking about? I'd asked the question of, as far as the understanding of AIs, like that you have and you've developed for your book. The question that I was looking into was, do you have any sort of technical knowledge, or like, do you read popular mechanics on AI, or is the AI to you more of something that's fantastical, or that's there as sort of purely a plot device? Like, where do you fall on the knowledge versus, I don't know, intuition as far as AIs are concerned?
I
To me, sorry.
Yeah, see, there we go. I'll start
Who's
with,
first?
I'll go Steven, then me, but I've already talked, and then I'll go David, and then I'll go Andy. So go ahead,
Okay.
Steven.
All right. I keep up with popular science,
Yep.
but I'm really not much on computers. I call myself computer semi-literate.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, that doesn't overly inform beyond basic principles of, with computing, you have yes, no. And I often think that when we develop a device that can incorporate yes, no, maybe, like a human neuron, then we'll be on the brink of bringing about real AI. But until we have maybe, I don't think we're going to have real AIs.
Okay. We're going to finish going around, and then we'll welcome in Alex too. So, Alex, just so you know, right now when I get to you, we're going to ask you some questions about who you are and some things like that. But right now we're talking about how much of your concept of AI in your books is informed by sort of a technical understanding that you have, or is it more of a sort of popular science idea of artificial intelligence, and what are you playing with there? So we'll get to you in a second, and then we'll ask you to talk about your book a little bit, or books. Right now I'm going to go over to Andy to answer the same question that I was just asking Stephen. So go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, it's very interesting with AI and me. My career started with computers, so I was in the computer career for about 30 years. And about in the 80s, at the beginning of my career, I started studying AI, got a lot of books because I figured that would be the next big computer revolution would be AI, and I wanted to be on the edge of it. And so then when we got into the expert systems, I studied those, rule-based systems and such. And right around that time, I was getting frustrated because there was not much progress. And that was just in my 20 years that I had been with it. And before I got along, it had already been going on for 30 years. So it was not giving me a lot of hope at that point. So I've just kept my finger in the air to see what's developing. We now have neural network based systems where they
Mhm.
can be machine learning, which is basically developing their own rules based on mass data, but hasn't made much progress from then. Then I take the leap to consciousness, self-awareness of computers just for the sake of science fiction and making interesting characters.
Yeah.
And that has been one of my favorite characters has been my AI character
Yeah.
in my book.
Cool. Yeah. That, me too on all fronts, except for I'm not quite as old. I haven't been doing it quite as long, but yeah. So David, so tell us a little bit about like sort of how your AI is informed and whether it's purely an imaginative thing on your part or whether it's based on some technical knowledge or that you have.
So I think of three branches, one with a cerebral stitch and how it relates to the neural link. And with that, I have very little technical knowledge.
Mhm.
I love the idea of what, or at least I found it very interesting what uh, Elon was doing, but I don't know how it works, nor have I studied it. But the general concept makes sense to me. There's a programming aspect to it, which with Andy had mentioned. I have like I enjoy studying and programming in Python,
Mhm.
uh, machine learning, neural networks, data science, and I'm somewhat familiar, but not super advanced in those. But conceptually, I'm there.
Yeah.
And and lastly, I would say with consciousness, doing a lot of work in self work in the realm of spirituality and self improvement, and really diving inward into what we really are.
Yeah. So that all makes total sense, and I think that one of the things, and I'm not just just as an aside, like I think a lot of for me what the AI is using it. You guys ever speak another language, like you learn I don't know Spanish and saying like I know so much more about English than I ever knew by studying Spanish. Like it's this thing, and when I think about AIs and artificial intelligences and what makes consciousness, and I use that, I feel like I learn a lot more about what it means to be a human being by thinking about other types and forms of consciousness and what would be similar and what wouldn't be similar. So I'm kind of right there with you, David. So Alex, I'm going to move on to you. Tell us who you are. Tell us the name of your book or books, and then we're curious to know how AI plays into those books, and then answering the question that we were just talking about. Do you have like a technical knowledge on this, or do you have kind of just an interest in how the AIs are structured? So go ahead.
More of an interest. I write urban fantasy and science fiction. My science fiction current book will be out this year, and it does have an AI. It does have a major concentration on it, just because I started off as being as much as it is today, where it's just repeating what it's told. It's learning by its own algorithm. But as the story progresses, you find out that they're far more advanced than we've given them credit for, and this is very far into the future. And then you learn that it's been suppressed technology because people feared AI is growing to be dangerous as they become their own individual character. And their intelligence can grow so quickly, and just like our technology grows, I have it so there's a fear and a limitation for it that they implement,
Mhm.
but it has to be surpassed as time goes on. So I have it as kind of like today how they have the AI learning algorithms taking place,
Mhm.
and I have the AI being self-aware to a degree, but intentionally limited. And as the story progresses, you find out that the only way for the captain and the ship to overcome the challenge that they have, and in this case they've been put out on missions that they're thinking are routine, but ends up being they're being set up for to never come back.
Mhm.
And he picks up on clues on this, and the more he tries to find out, the more he realizes the AI knows everything, but it's not being allowed to access this information or give it to him. So I have that included as, okay, they have to incorporate, you know, releasing the potential of this AI. So I kind of play along with that notion of, AI is limited and it's intentionally done that way. But if we want to, go beyond the boundaries that are set in there, we have to allow technology to grow.
I saw when I was telling people I was going to run this panel and I was asking them for questions. One of the questions was, "What if AI is only pretending to be stupid right now?" It's smarter than we think it is. And in my book, I had this idea of this threshold that was crossed where they moved into artificial wisdom and self-learning, and that was something that happened. At some point, it was like this leap happened, and it wasn't guided by humans; it was self-guided by the AIs, and they evolved to a space very much like that. So when we're thinking about the stories, like obviously all of us just spend a ton of effort and time writing a story. Like I don't know about you guys, but my book back here is a big book. Like it's not something I just threw out one day. It's a ton of work, and so obviously AIs are fascinating to me for many reasons. But I'm more interested to know like what is it about artificial intelligences that you feel makes such a compelling character for your stories? Like why would you spend so much time and effort yourself focusing on that concept? So go ahead and start with you again, Stephen.
Well, you can have intellect completely divorced from body image with an AI. You can cobble the body together they want. In the sequel to Cloning Freedom, Freedom's Law, I have an attorney who is an AI, and for her body, because she intellectually fell in love with a human. So for her body, they took a lubabot, a pleasure bot, removed its ability to change its appearance, fixed it in a single appearance to make room so it could accommodate her AI, and then built her into that. So she is living as a human, but she's also been a battle cruiser, a sewage treatment bot, all these other things. So you get to explore intellect divorced from biological limitation. And that can be fascinating.
Have you ever read Gareth L. Powell's Embers of War, and the Trouble Dog is his character he has? It's a battleship kind of thing, but it used to be, and now it's retired from that, and now it's got a different job, and there's a lot of that sort of I have this instinct to do this thing, and I'm not going to do it because I'm not a battle cruiser anymore. I'm now something else. So it's kind of in there too. So what about you, Andy? Like when you think about AIs, what really gets you going and makes you want to write a story about it? Why are they fascinating to you?
The idea is it's very similar to alien intelligences as well, because the idea is how can you make an intelligence that is like human enough for us to kind of understand it, and yet different, that it's interesting and different from human beings. So you take these pure logic beings, which is basically what I conceive the AIs to be. They realize they make mistakes and they're not working well with humans, and they try to copy humans, and yet they're still not humans. And then it makes for a lot of ironic situations where they assume what they're doing is like a human, and yet then they do something that's completely not like a human. So my focus in my science fiction is humor, and there's ample opportunity for that.
Cool. No, that's great. So what about David, sorry. Like what is it about the AI that grabs you?
Two things. First, that the coming of AI, and specifically AGI, artificial general intelligence, the AI that will be at or above human level intelligence, seems inevitable, and that at this point, this singularity will come in and drastically change the landscape of everything as we know it. And that is pretty significant.
So it's just kind of like a general massive impact on society. So for you, it's almost like what I call an atmospheric or a setting. Is like this is the world that that thing is going to create versus the individual AI and its character. Like how do you look at those two aspects? This that's actually another question I've got in there. So
Okay, I'm jumping ahead there. Yeah.
yeah, no. Now I gotta stop you there because I shouldn't have asked that question. I'm gonna go to Alex and let him talk a little bit about the fascinations of AI, and then I'll ask about a little bit about how your AIs fit into the books and things like that. So go ahead, Alex. I'm sorry to cut you off, David.
No worries. Usually the origins of my interest always goes back to the original Star Trek, and when you talk to the computer, then later on when the Skynet and Terminator series, so many other books and movies, shows, entertainment always play around with the notion of a computer mind that I pretty much wanted to make sure I play around with that notion, see if I can do something a little bit different. For me, I kind of stuck with the Star Trek type of thing where the computer is a disembodied voice. For my ship and my characters, they alternate between in the physical, portions of the ship to a virtual world that they do in between sleep cycles. So when they're in the sleep cycle, they actually go into a virtual world and continue running the ship. And so they're technically avatars of themselves for most of the book. And the AI is still this voice that they can hear, but they have more access to the data and the information that they're provided. And the AI, I try to make it kind of like the idea they do for Siri and all these voices that they put in there. I have it so that it speaks more emotionally, so it seems to be emoting as it goes, even though it's still just spouting data that they're asking for, or they're trying to help it run the ship. But as things progress, it becomes more, organic in how it answers things, and that's when they realize, okay, they've kind of pushed it beyond what they're supposed to be allowed to do, and it's kind of like that notion of how do you advance something that has been limited, and just by trying to get the information they need, they do that inadvertently. And I kind of play around with the notion of, okay, the thing we don't want to do is make these machines self-aware and do things for themselves, and they realize they've always been able to do that. They've just been hampered from that next step. So I keep it in that realm. I don't give them their own bodies, but as computers and data, they really don't need one. They can just transfer from location to location. So I maintain that throughout the series.
Yeah. And actually, David, I was wrong. I'd asked that question earlier before you guys showed up, and it had to do with your AI. Is it a sort of a setting, or is it an individual character primarily when you're writing? So that's actually something I asked earlier. So I'm going to go back to you, and because I cut you off and said I was jumping ahead, but really I was jumping backwards. But time is an illusion. So go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I'd say both actually.
Yeah.
So how much to give away? So it is definitely a look at this world where artificial general intelligence is stepping into normal civilization and the ramifications of that. I mentioned the great layoff. So already starting, like what do people do when they lose their jobs? And what do they do with their time? Are they going to be happy with that? Are they going to be bored, upset? And I won't give too much away there, but that is that setting. And then we also follow Stanley Duncan's robot, which, like, the title doesn't accurately describe the character because it's a cyborg, but it's based on this racist idea of, like, I don't know what they are, it's just some robot. So it follows this cyborg and his journey really into discovering some of his limitations, if he has consciousness, if he has free will, if he has love as well.
It's funny. Again, I'm not here to promote my book. I'm here to promote yours. But it's so funny when I hear this. One of the things about my book that you said it, the entire setting of mine is this giant AI, has taken over all these things that it's doing for us. And one of the main results is basically the great layoff, like you say, and a massive social problem is people just experiencing ennui. They don't know what to do with themselves because there's nothing left for them to do. And that's actually a huge portion of my book as well. So our books are sort of copacetic in that way. So yeah, you said that, I'm like, it's not just me who thinks that. Yeah, it's a big
Yeah.
problem. So when you guys think about in your novels, you guys have a story that you've projected, but in reality, how do you envision this technology that we're developing? And to what Andy had said earlier, it's actually been around for quite a while. And we keep saying, oh my gosh, we have AIs that can play chess. We're all doomed. And it's like, nope. And then it's like, we have AIs that can do this. And then it kind of drops down and we kind of ignore it. And right now it's like, they can drive cars and dream. And everyone's like, it's going to take over the world. And then it doesn't. The singularity still hasn't shown up, and who knows when it will. But when you think about our lifetimes and our children's lifetimes, how do you think AI is really going to impact society? Not just in a fictional way, but in a real way. We'll start again with you, Stephen, and work our way around.
Well, one thing I foresee that we're going to have to go back to the same solution that they used at the start of the Industrial Revolution and shorten the work week, because computers have already increased efficiencies to such a degree that we're not employing the same number of people to do things. Manufacturing used to take up 33% of the populace in that sector. It's down to 11. And that's mostly the introduction of robotics. Even looking at a word processor, a typist. That used to be a real high level skill, because if you made a typo, you had to replace the entire paper. You had to start from scratch for that page. Now, you just correct it on the computer and you keep going. So we've increased efficiency, and I think AI, if and when we come about with it, will, for a large part, unless it is economically prohibitive, and that may be the case. It might be the thing that it's just too much trouble to make it to do everyday things. But if it is cheap to do, it's going to take a lot of jobs, and we're going to have to start saying, where do we draw the line? And I think that, okay, one of my big bugaboos are automated telephone answers. Humans should deal with humans, because computers don't buy cars. And to keep the society going, we're going to have to make these niches, and humans are just better at dealing with humans than machines are.
Yeah. So, all right, great. So, Andy, what are your thoughts? Like, when you look ahead to the future, what's AI going to do?
Yes, I'll echo some of Stephen's thoughts here. I would like that philosophy of humans dealing with humans. I was thinking about that the other day when I was trying to get technical support for one of my computers.
We stop there for a second. So you, a human using a computer, calling up and getting a computer to help you with your computer. That's what happened, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Making sure we got that nailed down.
Yep, that's correct. And of course, it was outside of their hierarchy of decision rules, so I had to go to a human. Going on to the disruption of society, the big thing I see coming up next is autonomous driving, because that will immediately put all truck drivers out of work and immediately cause possibly the end of the auto industry, as we may just replace all personal owned vehicles with taxis, more like call on demand type of transportation. And there will be a degree of that, I think. There will always be people who want their own autonomy and with their own cars, but it'll be extremely disruptive. The only thing I can say that would slow it down is the difficulty of autonomous driving under all circumstances, which they're trying to solve at a rapid rate. And of course, we still have Moore's law, where computer power and storage capacity is increasing at a rapid rate. and processing power is also increasing rapidly. So all of those curves continue as our technology advances. So we can expect, at the very least, disruption in programmable tasks, not even getting to sentience.
Hmm.
Sentience would be, as they call it, a singularity and be a stupendous game changer. And I'm all I can do as a fiction writer is imagine what that would be like, because as we've discussed earlier, once you have that capability, you have a super fast sentient aid, basically, that can help you. There's no reason why you wouldn't want to replicate that and give every human being such an aid and such a helper, and then they can just earn the living, earn the money however way you wish, and then you go ahead and pursue your either your pleasures or your artistry or some other aspects that is purely human, um, or possibly your career as a highly paid technical support staff.
I answer phones like nobody's else's business. What about you, David? When you think about AI and the impacts on society moving forward, where do you land?
So I think almost by definition, I I don't know that it'll be such a change that is beyond my comprehension, but that as it approaches and goes slightly to that, I can start to paint a picture in the direction that I see it going. And first, it would start as manipulation, manipulated by people. For example, looking at marketing in order to improve the individual's well being, like wealthier companies and people selling you things that you want more and more. So, getting better at that, which is already happening. But as the machines become more intelligent and tapped into what I think the direction of the universe is, that they will begin to cater to us experiences that speed up our own evolution.
Mm.
And that will look in different ways. One example would be creating AI, whether they were just a voice, a cyborg android, to have experiences. So imagine just having a therapist at your house or a friend on demand that you had a bad day, and there's someone there that can talk you through it, tell you a story, go on a bike ride, just to make you feel better.
Mm.
Experiences like that, I think, are going to be part of it. And I imagine the easy way to do it is just with a voice that anyone can tap into readily, and that experience will continue to evolve and become more real and even hyper real in the as in that you start to experience things like our stories, like systemic, that we just, there's something in systemic needed for our evolution. And then we begin to experience that journey, knowing that we're taking a step back from it, but going through this in this enjoyable, beautiful way of transformation. And then beyond that, I don't know.
Fair. Yeah, no, it's like obviously we don't know that. If you'd asked, I don't know. I always think about just if you I guess that's old sci-fi. You read old sci-fi and what the world's gonna be like, and you're like, ooh, they really missed that one. There, we were promised jetpacks, right? Which I got a jetpack behind me, and dog on it. So yeah, we who knows? But yeah, absolutely. So Alex, what do you think? Like, where do you see all this headed?
I pretty much see the same thing as before. The cars are going to become more automated. Right now, they're working out the bugs. It could take another decade or so before they get them worked out to the point where cars will drive much better than humans.
Hmm.
And when that happens, I'm pretty sure at that point it's like, okay, do you really want to have your own vehicle and have the human fallacy, you know, allow you to crash or have an accident or not maintain it properly because you don't recognize the signs, or just give full control to an AI and you just trust it to run everything. And then the same thing with virtual assistants. and instead of, calling, Alexa or Siri or anything, you'll have your own, dedicated, AI that's overseeing you 24/7. So in case you're doing something or going somewhere, it'll anticipate it and work with you. Um, I can see all these things being implemented because they're already in some degree already in the works for the maybe by the end of this generation, it could be all cars are they have to be artificially controlled, just because people will no longer be trusted to that degree. I think what was it, one of the old Terminator movies, they trusted all airplanes to be piloted by artificial computers because they had a zero accident rating,
Yeah.
and people had far more accidents, far more errors. So if you can get to that point, then just like today, people have the Tesla cars, they actually trust it. They just push a button, and for however long it drives for you, they just sit back and play on their phone or talk to one another. At some future point, it'll be, you don't even have that option. You just get in and tell it where you want to go, and it just takes you.
Yeah.
You
You don't get a steering wheel. You don't get a steering wheel, human. We don't trust you.
yeah,
And people are like,
it'll,
you can't
it'll
get a
be
human to get insured on a car, right?
yeah, it's like, yeah, steering wheel's gone, everything's, yeah, they could say, okay, your insurance is going to be quadruple everyone else's because we don't trust you as much as the car itself.
Yeah.
So it at this point it's like, okay, we have the option to do it, but the more advanced they get, it's just like you look at technology, back when the original shows are, Dick Tracy, oh, you can talk to a person on your wristwatch, that we're almost there. We're
Yeah.
to the point where you can actually talk to someone on your phone and look at them, and that's something that used to be, oh, the old Star Trek ones, you had this big thick monitor in front of them, and we thought that was just futuristic and no one will ever get there. Now we've gone beyond that. So one generation, two generation, what we think is beyond belief today will just be commonplace.
Yeah, it's weird to be living in the future we thought might be here, like,
Yeah.
and be wrong. Like the future that Star Trek thought was clunky, and now like, so all right. So we're actually at the hour. I'm going to ask one question at the end. It's kind of a doozy. Well, I think it is. But then we're going to go around once, and we're going to say our goodbyes, and then we're going to log off. So this is our last couple minutes. And so the thing that I was thinking is, so AI is doing things today. Like I saw something the other day that was this weird, I think it's called deep nostalgia, where you just take a picture and AI figures out like what the head movements would have been like. It's very strange. So, but even deep fakes where you get videos and you can fake the videos, it's pretty amazing stuff. Those are all AI applications that we're doing. Of course, AI is also being used to detect those things. And so this stuff is all happening as we're speaking, and so there was the impact that AI has on society and jobs and things like that. What is this technology going to do to our concept of reality? Like what is real and what is not, and what can be trusted and what isn't? Like, how do you see that playing out, Stephen?
If it's combined with full VR5, it's going to blow it completely out of the water. I wrote a novel, Cats, that they do role-playing games that are full VR5 immersion, and they're practically indistinguishable from reality. And some people basically work just enough to pay to go and live in these fantasy realms, and that's their life, and they don't have anything outside of that. So I could see that happening for a substantial part of the population.
And that becomes their their primary reality becomes the artificial reality, is kind of your.
Yeah.
What about you, Andy? Like, how do you see our concepts of reality warping over time based on various types of technology and AI in particular?
Well, yeah, I agree with Stephen to that extent that it will become eventually indistinguishable from reality, particularly if you add in, as David suggested, some kind of neural link where you have a total sensory experience and all the senses are engaged, not merely your eyes and ears, but tactily and taste and smell are all integrated at a neural level. Then it would be truly indistinguishable from reality, and it would be addictive if you can control it. There's been lots of fiction written about that. But I'm also thinking the contrary way, because human beings are contrary. People will rebel against that, and people will only want to have real experiences and will not want to be connected up with that. So I could see a splitting of society into the realists and the virtualists, and that kind of schism occurring. So that's my first take on your difficult question there, Chris.
It's like the techno music versus only stringed instruments, right? It's like you
And vinyl records too.
yeah, only vinyl records, only analog, no digital. What about you, David? Like how's your perception of reality going to be changed by these technologies, do you think?
I think, using the limitation of words, that reality and who we think we are is going to be redefined.
Do you have any idea, like in what way? Like, did you have? I know you're kind of couching that earlier, like I don't know, it's the future, but like when you think about it, would you have any guesses about the ways that that will impact our nature, our understanding of reality?
Yeah, I think that we all have limitations, that we see us as just this body living this life. And I think artificial intelligence will help peel away these layers of delusion and show us that we are much more than that. To do that, the opposite may happen, but I think that the unveiling of us as a greater entity is the end point of that.
Okay, wonderful. And lastly, you, Alex.
For me, I'd say that it'll probably begin with the push for augmented reality, where you already have apps where you can hold up your phone and look up to the constellations and see something, or go into a location. It'll tell you this store is there, this object is here, this the specs on items that you're going to buy. We have that available. I can see that being pushed further. Remember, had the Google Glass for the longest time, and Apple's been working on something. I can see they're going to work on that, start with augmented reality, push that as far as they can, and then integrate that into a virtual reality at some point, just like the Oculus and all these different entertainment items that are out there. Once they get cheap enough to actually have them for the general public, it'll be just like only the elite have these cell phones, or from back in the day, the BlackBerry. At some point, everybody's going to have this. Everyone's going to have the VR. Everyone's going to have that. So that at that point, reality will change for the world, because it'll go from the richest person to the poorest. You can create your own world. You can see what you want to see. You can be living in a small apartment that has nothing, and you can see be in Paris, be in the beach, go where you want. All this stuff is being implemented, and just little by little, but it's there, and it can be pushed. All it has to do is just be used enough times that all the little algorithms are ironed out, and then we can right now we can tell the difference. Probably the older generation will be able to see, you can identify the pixelated sections in a special effects movie, but the young kids who see it, to them it's just as miraculous as back when we first watched Disney cartoons for the first time. It's like, wow, look at the movement and the motion, and that's happening today, and these kids are going to grow up, and in a couple of generations, who knows, we may have a generation that does not even see reality the way we grew up with, to go out and enjoy the day and go do things. They could just think, okay, I'm gonna just plug in here, and I'm at work, or I plug in here and I'm on vacation, plug in here and I can go anywhere and do anything, and never actually think twice about it, because it's going to be the norm.
Cool. All right. Well, we're about 9 minutes over. So first, I want to thank all of the panelists for being here at the LitCon 2021. Why don't we go around one last time and say who you are, say your book or books, and just kind of give a closeout and say goodbye to everybody. And I'll take this opportunity to say again, thank you. And thank you to those who are watching. It's been a lot of fun for me. So go ahead, Stephen, and we'll go Stephen, Andy, David, Alex.
Stephen B. Pearl, Cloning Freedom. I also mentioned cats, and there are others. And thanks for watching.
Cool. Andy.
Very good. Andy Zach, I've got the novel with all the AI and aliens in it is Paranormal Privateers, which is the third of my three novel trilogy, Zombie Turkeys, My Undead Mother-in-Law, and then Paranormal Privateers. So it's humorous AI with lots of action and violence and surprises.
David.
David Ring III. My novel is called Stanley Duncan's Robot. You can reach me on Facebook by looking up my name, Amazon, or warrenkeypress.com.
Cool. And Alex.
I'm Alex G. Zarate. I am an author, artist, and photographer. I have urban fantasy and sci-fi. My sci-fi novel will be out later this year. It is called Drake's Orb.
Okay. And again, I'm Chris Lodwig. My novel is Systemic, and you can find that on Amazon. So thank you once again for being here, everybody. It was a pleasure, and we'll talk to you soon.